Hello and welcome to another episode of Sandy Killer Projects. Today we are going to be starting on the rear main seal. This video is just going to be dedicated to doing that. It's a pretty common job on these XJs. As you can see though, we were in the middle of redoing the clutch. I have the transmission and transfer case out at the moment, but I figured this would be a good video to separate away from the other bits of the clutch and whatnot, because this is a fairly involved job, needs its own video. So only stuff to really go over with this is first thing we're going to do is drain the oil off of the drain plug, which is right here. Then there are 28 bolts on the oil pan that need to come off. There are 4 of which that fit a 1/2 inch. On mine it also fits a 13. The two larger ones are right here on either side of the crankshaft, and then the smaller ones are 7/16, and they run the full length of the side. Okay, so then there's one other spot up in the front where there are 2 larger bolts. I'll show you those. So here we are onto the front side. This bolt right here, and the same one on the other side, which would be this one right here, are also the 1/2 inch. All the rest of them, all the way down, should be the 7/16. If not, though, you may end up having to switch back and forth. It shouldn't be any more than just those ones, though. As you can see, I've already started draining the oil. Get this process going, and once this is completely drained out, I'll start taking the oil pan bolts off. Okay, so now that the oil is drained out, I went ahead and put the drain plug screw back in. I do want to mention, before I go too much more forward with this, you don't have to do this with the transmission off of it like I have. I just happen to be in the middle of a job. If you are going to do it with the transmission on it, there is a dust shield that is in the way right here when you're doing it, and the starter, which sits right here, needs to be taken out and set to the side, because if you don't, it's going to get in the way as you go to drop the oil pan down. But at the point I'm at right now, I've taken all of the bolts and loosened them, and then I've already done this, but I take a screwdriver and just work along the side to get the drain pan to drop off the seal a little bit. That way it's not still sucked up tight. Now that it's loose, I'm going to take all these bolts out of each side and drop the drain pan down. It won't come all the way down because of the position that it's in, but it will get in there really in a wonky position between the suspension and the front axle and the exhaust. So just be aware that when it comes down, it could splash some residual oil or make a mess. Just go easy with it, get the bolts out, and keep a hand on it as you're taking it off. Okay, as you can see, oil pan is down. The old gasket's still hanging on up here a little bit. The oil pan itself is there. You see the dipstick in the oil pickup. That stuff, I'm going to aim to leave that in place. I should be able to snake this guy down and around and out of here without taking it off, but we'll see. Some cases you do end up having to fight it off, but the oil pan will come out, and then we'll start removing this. It's called the oil pan girdle. It's mostly just used for like keeping the oil up on the bottom of the crankshaft. It just has a crap load of bolts in it also. I'll go over that once I get the oil pan out and we start working in here. As you can see, the oil pan is now down. It's still sitting right in here. I did end up having to take the oil pump off of it. Oil pump is right there. There's not much to it. It's these 2 little bolts. Just make sure if you take this off that you put it back in the exact same spot it was located. Otherwise it's going to cause you issues. Won't move that pin in the top of it. None of that. Just straight up, straight out. There's a gasket on top of it. Most of the time it doesn't get messed up as long as you take it in and out nice and smoothly. Okay, so as you can see, I'm in the middle of taking off the girdle. These are 14 millimeter or 9/16. There are 14 of them total. You just run them off. They are torqued to a spec. We'll get to that when we put them back on. So they are a little bit of a effort to get off, but you just keep popping them off until you get all the way down the length of them, and then pull the girdle off. They're sitting on the ends of the main caps, the studs that hang off of the bottom of them. So we need it off for sure, because this is the main cap that we need to get off, and it's sitting on top of it, and you don't really want to bend this thing out of the way, so you're better off just taking the whole thing off. So there it is, the girdle off. Next step in here is taking off the rear main cap, which would be these two studs right here. Once we get those off, there's some tricks to getting the cap off. Okay, so right now I have the two bolts out of the main journal. They are long studs that look like this. They take a 21mm seam to fit, or a 13/16. They're both close. They're not quite the right size, but these are torqued down, so make sure you realize it's going to take a lot of force to get them off. Also, that cap is seated on there, that's why it hasn't just fallen out. So I need to tap on it with a block of wood to break it loose, and it's important that you tap on it with something softer, because you can break stuff in there. There it is off. As you can see, the rear main cap has been leaking, the rear main seal has been leaking for quite some time. It's why it's so dirty looking up in there. The bottom half of the rear main is right there in the seat, and we'll change that in a minute once I start doing the stuff that needs to be done in the garage. And the upper half of the rear main is this little guy right there. Okay, so this is your crankshaft. You need to make sure that you don't touch it, you don't ding it, you don't anything to it, because any damage that's done to the crankshaft will cause all sorts of problems. So to get the upper half of the rear main seal out, we're going to take a little tiny pick, and we're going to push at it, and then we're going to get it to start coming out the other side. It's going to be difficult for me to do this holding the camera, so I'm going to have to get some sort of a mount if I'm going to show how it's done. But that's the upper half of the rear main seal right up in there, and that little guy right there. So again, don't touch any of the rest of the stuff, just leave it all alone. So for in here, the last little bit that I got to do is scrape the seat for where the oil pan went. I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to start in the garage side stuff. Alright, so I've cleaned the mating surface of the oil pan to the bottom of the engine, where it's going to go. I want to go over what I did so that people are aware how to do it. You need to take a putty knife and take it and go away from the inside of the engine. The purpose of this is to remove all the heavy stuff. The next thing that I did, which I don't have with me, is I took some high grit sandpaper, which means not a low number, a high number, 400 plus. And the purpose of that is for is not to put a new surface on it. It's literally just to take the burned, etched in oil and start breaking it up a little bit. So I take that and I go along the surface all the way across, not on the front cover. If you do, the front timing covers are made of aluminum. You don't want to sand on that, you'll etch it. So knock all this heavy stuff away, rough into the stuff that's still there. Then I take a clean rag with some degreaser on it, and I take the degreaser and I wipe the rest of the surface to get the rest of that baked on grease off, and what's left is the surface that looks like this all the way across. It should look something like this. The one word of caution is don't dig too hard with the putty knife, and don't sand with too low of a grit of sandpaper if you're going to use sandpaper, because if you do, you'll etch this, you'll actually create a pathway for the oil to get out. Okay, so there would have been no real good way for me to show you this, but I took a little small punch. I get as far away from the crank as I can. I put it up into this groove right here, and I tap it gently with a hammer until it starts to move. Once it starts to move, you can push it. You'll see it come out the other side there. Once you get it up the other side there, all you have to do is Grab a pair of pliers on the small needle nose pliers on the outside of it, and it'll come right out. Just keep walking it along. And it's out. That's it. Okay, so we need to look at this also. The outside edge is solid. The inside edge, the side towards the motor, has a little groove in it. So that's the side that's going to go back in when we put this back, the new one back in. So it's important to take note of that, because there's two different sides to the rear main seals when you look at them. It's just something to be aware of so that you don't put the seal in backwards. This little wiper edge right there is actually used to keep the oil on the right side. So this guy will go in with in that direction. Alright, so here's a new seal. This side will go towards the back. There's the little seal side, the little groove that I was talking about. Okay, so all I've put on this is some dish soap. If you buy the Felpro set, it'll give you a little paper gasket to help you get it started around this edge here. This set is a crown set. It didn't come with that. So all I had to do was put a little bit of soap on the leading edge. So we'll take it and we'll put it right up against the crankshaft, and then we'll lay it into there so that it gets into the edge. And as you can see, it's already started to take. It doesn't take much of anything as long as you have a little bit of lube on it. So then, like I said, there's a old school mechanics trick to take some soap, dish soap, and run it along this edge, and all it does is help keep it lubricated. And I've got a little on there already, but I'm putting a little more on just so that we can see. We don't want to lose the shape on the seal, so all we're going to do is just slowly work it around and keep pushing it in until it comes back around the other side. This dish soap only goes on this back portion here, and we're just going to keep working it in until it comes back around to the other edge. And there it is. I put it in completely by hand. You can tap on it a little if you have to. You really shouldn't need to. The soap should be enough to get it around. You do want it sticking out just a hair on this side and just a hair on the other side of the engine, because if you don't, when the cap goes on, it won't seat fully into it. It's got to actually compress it up a little bit. So that's the upper half of the rear main. Let's go into the garage, because that's where we got to work next. Garage space is kind of nuked, and it looks like the 53 frame is now going to be my bench for this little bit here. So I've already taken the rear main out of the bottom cap, but I wanted to show it's the same thing as on the other side. There's no relief for the oil seal, and on the other side there's that line that's the relief for the oil seal. So this, when you take it out, you literally just have to like peel up the sides a little bit and get something in there to break it loose, and then once it breaks loose, you can peel the whole thing up and out. It's a little hard to show, but once that's done, I'm gonna clean up in there. There's a lot of debris from it having leaked for a long time. This side right here is also where the oil pan gasket goes along, so we're gonna wipe that up real good too. Alright, so I've cleaned out the groove for the rear main seal, the bottom half. I've also cleaned the groove for the oil pan gasket. In here, all I've done is taken something to get the big chunks out, because there was some baked in grease into that groove. I took like a little screwdriver and just knocked all the stuff out. Then I took some degreaser and just wiped until I got like a nice clean dry surface in there, also along these upper grooves. So that is all we're going to do with that cleaning wise. And then on the oil pan side, I did the same thing, except for I ran a little sandpaper in there. This internal surface where the seal is, you really don't want to be rubbing abrasives in there, so that's why we didn't do that. So the next thing that happens is just along this top seat here, we're going to put some black silicone just inside of there. You don't really want it coming out. We'll actually like wipe it clean if it gets a little too much, but I'm literally just going to put a little teeny dab of this stuff, if it'll come out with one hand. There we go, right along this top surface, and that's it. And then same thing on the other side, and anything that's sticking out extra after we put the seal in is going to get taken off. That one will go like that. As you can see, I've already kind of made a mess of that one a little bit. So seal. The other thing that you can do if it's not seating down in, which we'll do a little of that. I have some of my trusty soap. Just take a little soap and rub it along this upper edge here, just to make sure that it seats. You don't want to put oil or a lube or any of that into it, and you're just putting it along this back edge. So with that done, I'm going to take this and set it down, wipe my hand off so that I can push on this thing, and then you take the seal and set it right down in there, making that one go into the sealant, and this side going into the sealant. This one actually is going in easier. So push that down in. Yeah, I've got the gasket stuff all over me. This one is actually, this gasket, this rear main seal is actually designed to have a little bit of a step up in here, and that's to help with the mating surfaces on the other side. So then same thing here, I'm just going to work this edge in to the groove with the silicone, and once it's all the way seated down, this side will be just about flush, this side will be just about flush, and then, as I said, this edge here actually is designed to stick up a little bit. So that is basically how that guy goes in there, and this is now ready to go back in. Well, as soon as I wipe the excess silicone up off the top. Okay, so back underneath the car, I have the rear main bearing cap. I've taken a little bit of oil and just put it along the journal. It was already oiled up beforehand. I want to make sure that it stays oily, because otherwise it could cause problems inside the crankshaft. Then also, the manual says to clean the studs and put some oil on them, so I've done that as well. I'm going to set the cap back up into place and just hand run the screws up, and then I'll show you the next part. Okay, the manner in which I'm doing this, it says to run the torques up to 85 foot-pounds, having oiled the bolts. So I've set the torque at 40 to do the first pass on them. I'm going to run it up to 70 for the second pass. The reason for doing it this way is I'd much rather sneak up on the torque and seat that rear main bearing cap than just crank all the way down on one side, because you need to put this down very evenly. If you don't put the cap down very evenly, it won't seat properly. So I've already done it at 40, so we're going to go up to 70. At 70. There's 70. Now we'll run it up to 85, and then the rear bearing will be torqued properly per the manual. So this will be 85. I've heard some guys say 80. It may be, but the manual that I have says 85. And it's probably because of the fact that it's considered a torque with the oil on it. So that is now properly torqued. The rear main is changed. Okay, I have the girdle back on with the bolts mostly hand tight. What you're going to want to do is you're going to run these up until they're just touching. You don't want to put pressure on them until they're all at least set all the way down. And then once you get to there, you torque each one of these bolts to 35 foot-pounds. You don't have to put any like Loctite or anything like that in there, because of the fact that the bolts are already all oiled up. That's going to make a wet torque anyway. Also, the one thing I did want to note is you see how the girdle is indented on this side? It's exactly the same on the other side, and it's basically to where you could flip it. It doesn't matter which direction this thing goes on. It won't know the difference. It will literally mount up in the exact same spot no matter which side you put it on. So I'm going to run these up to touch, and then I'm going to run them up to 35 foot-pounds with the torque wrench, and then we'll move on to the next part. Okay, just for reference, the rear main seal that I used was a Crown 4778 126, and the oil pan gasket that I used is the OS 34308R. This particular one is a Felpro. I actually have a Felpro rear main seal somewhere in this garage, but this garage looks like it exploded and I can't seem to find it. The advantage to the Felpro versus this is the little paper gasket is used to help get the upper half of the rear main seal in, and then the advantage to using the Felpro version of these is the snap-ups. These things go up into the studs to help get the oil pan up, which is actually backwards to the way that I usually do this, because I usually seat the oil pan gasket into the oil pan and then put it up. This way in particular, it wants to go up using the studs up on the car, and then you put the oil pan up after that. So now I got to clean up the oil pan and get it ready to go in. So there's a couple of things that need to get done before we put the gasket up into place. First, you need to put a little bit of RTV up along the side of the cap and up into the corner edge of the groove for the rear main cap. Then you got to put your snap-ups in. As you can see on the other side here, I managed to make that look a little bit better than the other one. Okay, so then we got to go do the front. Alright, so on the front we're going to do kind of the same thing. We're going to put some black RTV along the gap between the timing cover and the engine block, and then put the snap-ups up. And again, we're going to do that on both sides. So the gasket goes in fairly simply. You just slide it up over the lugs for that. And as you get down, don't set it all the way up, because you want to get the gasket to slide over the timing cover mount. And then in the back, you want it to slide. You want to be able to walk it into the groove along here for the rear main cap. That'll make sure that your oil pan doesn't start leaking. Okay, so the oil pan is sitting back up into place, but it is not yet mounted. We still have to put the oil pump back in. The reason I had to pull the oil pump back out, or pull the oil pump out, is because of the fact that I didn't jack up the car. I have a 4.5 inch lift on this. It makes it easier to get in and out of stuff. If you have more space between your front axle and your engine, you won't need to do that. But in this particular case, I had to, because there's no way to get it clear. I would have needed another 3 or 4 inches to get it out of the pan. So the oil pump will go back in on that flat spot that's right there. The torque specs for the bolts on it are 17 foot-pounds. I don't have a torque wrench that goes that small, so I'm just going to go a little past snug. I would recommend that you use the correct torque specs and not always do the things the way that I'm showing them, because sometimes they're not the most correct. But we've cleaned the oil pan, cleaned all the bolts, cleaned inside the oil pan. You get a bunch of junk behind this bolt because there's a little cavity inside the oil pan right here that keeps all the junk. So you definitely want to get all that out, or you may end up cycling it back through the motor. Now there's no way for me to get all that burnt, nasty oil back up in there. So next, the oil pump will be on, and we'll start putting the bolts on the oil pan. Okay, so as you can see, the oil pump is back in. I'm going to show you in a second how to put the oil pan up on these snap-ups. Okay, so this is kind of a hard view for me to get on though, but I'm going to try to do this as best I can so that you can see on the video what exactly it is I'm doing. So once they go up, you just get it up and it clicks, and then once it clicks, it's held in place up there for you. So you don't have to do anything beyond that but put the screws in. So they go on, and then they kind of click over the openings for the holes that you have. Once you do that, you just start running your bolts back in. So that's where we're at next. Here's what it looks like when it's roughly mounted. At this point, you're going to take these guys, you're going to basically like set them up to touch. So you're just going to make them so that they go up and push everything together and snug everything up without actually being tight. So once you get all of them in and down and set, the torque specs on these are very, very small. So these particular ones are called, they're quarter 20 volts. So this calls for a 7mm torque. Again, I don't have a torque wrench that small. These are 5/16. Once you get these all the way done, you put the 5/16 bolts back in. Those then get torqued down to 11 foot-pounds, because these take a 7/16 socket and these take a 1/2 inch. So I'm going to run all these down snug, and then I'm going to take the plastic studs out and put the 5/16 bolts back in, and I'm going to run those down snug, and then I'm going to use my best judgment to torque them. This is actually what causes oil pan seals to leak. If you do not torque these properly, or at least within a couple of foot-pounds on either side, usually what happens is people over torque the crap out of them, and the oil gasket starts spewing out the side, and the oil starts spitting out of the side of the oil pan. So if you don't have a torque wrench, I would suggest getting one. I have back in the day had issues where I had them leak. I've done enough of them now that I don't think there's a main issue with this one. Okay, so now that all of our bolts are torqued down tight, there's one last important thing we're going to do. We're going to change the oil, because we already drained the oil out of it, so we may as well take the filter off and change it. The Jeep takes a pH 16 filter, which that's pretty basic. I haven't done an oil change video on this, but if you're going to do this on this car, you definitely got to know what oil filter it takes. If you don't want to use a Fram, the AutoZone one that they're selling right now is the STP version. It's still a 16. So once this thing drains out a little bit, it's starting to get windy here, so it's trying to blow back at me. I'm going to unscrew this and put on my fresh oil filter, and then we'll fill her up with oil. Okay, so the XJ takes 6 quarts of oil. In this case, I'm using 2050. This Jeep has over 100,000 miles on it, well over 100,000 miles. So I'm putting the oil weight that's best for what it is. You should already know, though, that it does take 6 quarts of oil. I normally at this point would start the Jeep up and show you how well it's running and there's no leaks, but as I said, we're in the middle of doing the clutch and the transmission is off. I'd much rather wait until we're done and fire it all up then. So, as always, thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe, and we'll keep making more videos. Thanks.